have a friend who was at dinner and someone walked up to him and just said, Black Lives Matter. And so there's these weird assumptions that we all speak alike and sound like they have taken entertainment and applied it to every Black person walking. So the assumption would be culturally we're all the same, and it is so bizarre.
You're listening to As in Heaven, a Christian conversation on race and justice. In this episode, we welcome Trillia Newbell to the podcast to share some of the unique relational dynamics facing Black women. She covers being profiled as well as many false stereotypes and tropes that she's experienced as an author and speaker in the evangelical space. Trillia was just an absolute joy to have on the podcast. She has such a warm, radiant energy and clearly loves the gospel of Jesus Christ. Also, as a side note, her book, God's Very Good Idea, is my 3-year-old son's favorite right now. We read it almost every single night. So Trillia is kind of a celebrity in our household. Anyway, Jim Davis is your host. Justin Holcomb is the guest co-host on this episode. Mike Graham is the executive producer of this podcast. My name is Matt. I'm the technical producer. And now please enjoy this episode of As in Heaven with Trillia Newbell.
Welcome to As in Heaven. My name is Jim Davis. I am your host, and my co-host today is Dr. Justin Holcomb over there at the other end of the table. And we are thrilled today to welcome Trillia Newbell to the show. Trillia is a writer and former director of community outreach for the ERLC. You are an acquisitions editor at Moody Publishers. You have a degree in political science from the University of Tennessee, and you've written numerous books, which we were all talking about before the show. You started with United, Captured by God's Vision for Diversity, Sacred Endurance, Fear and Faith, and you have an excellent children's book called God's Very Good Idea, and you have a brand new kind of preteen teen book called Creative God, Colorful Us that we definitely want to talk about and mention and put on the website. And you are the married and mom of two children. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. Looking forward to the conversation.
Trillia, as you know, we've discussed this. We really wanted to devote an entire episode this season to some of the unique challenges that Black women face. And we fully realize that just like Black people are not monolithic, neither are Black women. However, we recognize that there are some common challenges that many Black women face that you might not, that our average viewer might not know about if this isn't their lived experience. So we know that this is a challenging topic, and depending on who we have on the show, answers we know would vary a bit. But with that being said, I just want to say we're excited to hear from you, your perspectives on this topic. And if anyone knows Trillia at all, you know that she is one of the kindest, humble, and loving people that you'll ever meet. So I just want to say thank you for engaging on this topic.
Just to get started, I mean, a good place to start is I would like to hear how you came to know Jesus and what your church background.
I grew up in a very loving home, but not a Christian home. And I would say we were holiday Christians. That's what I call us. We would go on Easter and Christmas, and that's about it. And so I didn't grow up in church. And my mom is the only one who I saw. I mean, she would pray every night. So I saw her on her knees praying every single night. And so I believe she is a Christian. My father, who passed away, we're not really sure. My mom seems to think that he was, but he didn't lead us in that area. And so I grew up just kind of living for myself. And then in high school, I believe I was around maybe 16, someone did try to get me to go to a church. And so I went, and they basically told me, you're going to hell. And I was like, I don't want to go to hell. And so I started to attend this church, but they weren't preaching the gospel. And so it was very works-based, and that didn't stick with me because after a while of working really hard, I realized, I really want a boyfriend. And so I stopped going. and yeah, it was just really, that's a true story. And so I started dating this guy, and in between then, I don't even know if you want the whole story, but so I'll shorten this. But in between then,
Go ahead.
Okay.
You teased it. The whole story makes me feel like we're missing something. So just go for it. We'll see.
Well, when I was about 19, I was leading a camp, and I had a co-camp instructor, and we happened to be, we all know now the sovereignty of God, but I happened to be in the same room with her. And in short, she shared the gospel with me. It's interesting, though, I was very opposed to Christianity at this point. Very opposed to I thought Christians were weird. I pushed against a lot of that Christian thought, and and ideologically, I was, for lack of better word, you would have put me on the left, quote unquote. I really hate those labels, but that's the best way to probably describe my general thinking on all things, everything. And so when she opened her Bible to have a quiet time, I immediately got defensive and was like, "What are you doing?" And she said, "Having a quiet time." And then the next thing, I was like, "Well, you keep that over there." But the next thing you know, I'm on her bed and like weeping. But I still had this relationship with this guy. And so I did not submit my life to the Lord at that moment, but she kept up with me. She's a little evangelist. And so she and I would have lunch every now and then. And she just slowly kept, and I would do something that I thought was terrible. And I'd talk to her about it. And she would just remind me to go to Jesus and that I can confess. And she was just slowly, she was just being a friend. And then after 2 broken engagements, I went to her church, and you know the hymn Rock of Ages, Wash Me, Savior, or I'll Die. I sang those songs, and I knew that lyric, and I knew I needed Jesus, or I was dying. There was a real spiritual death, and I needed Jesus. And so after the service, I went to her and a few other people and said, "I want to know Jesus." And we prayed, and my life has been transformed ever since. It was pretty radical. Like, I am cutting a few things because it's just a lot changed. But one thing that's really neat is that guy I was I had all the 2 broken engagements with and really dated for a long time. A year later, he became a Christian. Yes. And then a year later, we barely talked to each other, but a year later, he asked if we could date. And I was doing campus ministry at the time. And so I said no, because I thought I was Paul. And I was like, I don't want to be disturbed or whatever, but I'm just kidding. But so a year later, he asked again, and now we've been married for 17 years.
It's Thurn? Thurn was the guy? Wow. I like
that you know his name.
I was waiting to hear, like, well, where does he show up in the picture? But he was in the early part of the story. Because you guys really like each other. Like he's always, like, he adores you. And likewise, you can tell from the stuff you guys see that I love seeing that. So that's beautiful. I'm glad you told the whole story.
Yeah. It's really a great story. And I feel like in a lot of ways, Ephesians 2, the entire chapter, sums up our relationship. First reconciled to God, then reconciled to each other, both as family, but we're now one. And of course, that is talking about how we are as Christians now one, because the veil of hostility has been broken down in the body of Jesus Christ. But it's just, it is a sweet thing that the Lord brought us together. So I'm really grateful.
Well, I didn't know that story, and I really appreciate you sharing. I too, my conversion in my early 20s was a radical, this moment kind of conversion. My wife is somewhere in these 10 years it happened, and I hope my kids have that story, but there are some real ways that God has blessed me with that kind of conversion, and I too met my wife in campus ministry, so I appreciate that. Now you're a believer, you have a whole new worldview, you have the Holy Spirit. So looking at this issue that we're talking about, broadly speaking, what are some of the challenges that you have either observed or have been your personal experience that some Black women have experienced in the broader culture?
For me, and I'm really glad that you started this conversation by saying we are not monolithic, because we're not. And so there are going to be a whole lot of different experiences that people have experienced, but I will talk about just some of the ones that I have. When I was younger, before I became a Christian, I remember talking to a mother of one of my friends, and he was just a friend. I don't know that we were attempting to date each other or start a relationship, but she explained to me that we couldn't. And the reason why was that we were different, but these weren't like the good differences that I try to proclaim, because God's made us different. She was basically saying I was subhuman, like I was a different species of a person. And that is experience that I've experienced over and over again. Even just maybe 4 years ago, I was speaking at a church about the topic of Imago Dei, the image of God, and how God's created us. And a man came up afterwards and tried to show me that I had a curse. We were very different. Curse of Ham, it's a thing. And that we were not actually the same. And I just, so that I think, I don't know if it's just a female problem. I think it goes beyond female, but that is an experience between us, the females. But I know many men who are African-American, who are Black, who are people of color, who have been rejected because of the color of the skin, because they're seen as subhuman. And so that, to me, is deep-rooted sin, but it's also something that's been taught in their churches. And so when he came up to me with his Bible open, it's because he had learned that somewhere. And so I had to correct all these things, but that's one experience. Another experience just happened yesterday. I was at the doctor's office because I had a sore throat and had to have the coronavirus test, which is negative by the grace of God. And
that's a terrible test. I've had it. I'm sorry.
Oh, I was like, I will blow my nose a little, and so she did some things for me, because I was like, you are not sticking that all the way in my brain. But anyways, we digress. But as she started to talk to me about all the different tests that we were going to have, so I was getting a flu test and a strep test, all the tests, because because of the season we're in. She wouldn't give me a flu test. And I was like, well, yeah, go ahead and do it, because we might, you might as well. And if you're doing strep and coronavirus, you might as well. And she said, well, it's just going to cost a lot. And I was like, well, we have insurance, so maybe we can, take care of it. And she was like, well, and as she continued, I realized she said, I don't know who has insurance and who doesn't and who can do. And then she started talking as if I'm a single mom and just all of these different things. And I was like, oh, I'm being profiled. It's been a little while, so I couldn't. And so I said, well, I want the flu test first. And then I was like, yeah. So just go ahead and do that. But I said, we have insurance, and you don't have to carry that concern. We will take care of it. And I could tell she started backpedaling. She kind of got that I got what was going on. And she was like, just trying to take care of us girls. And but I was like, no, but I didn't have I pick and choose my battles. And that was one I just thought, she gets it. It was very clear that it was wrong. But that's another thing, being profiled. So what does that mean? Well, socioeconomic assumptions, parenting assumptions, marriage and family assumptions. There was a lot going on in that one experience. And that is something I know without a doubt that women experience. Another assumption, I got into law school. That's part of my story.
Can I jump in one second? Because this is a side comment, but it's something you said, so I want you to put a pin on the applying to law school or going to law school. You said a phrase, you pick and choose your battles, which just stood out to me because I don't pick and choose my battles. When I'm offended, I say something because I have the luxury of saying something. And people would expect me to say something, but that's something that we have heard a lot of the I'm going to pick and choose my battles. And the idea that a sister in Christ has to talk like that sucks and makes me angry. So that just stood out to me. And I wish you didn't have to pick and choose your battles.
Well, thanks for your tender heart, Justin, and for you just recognizing that. I pick and choose my battles for one biblical reason and one time reason. Be slow to speak. And so I want to abound in love. I want to abound in grace. And so I'm going to try my best to be slow, to make sure I'm accessing the situation properly. In this situation, she stepped in it. she just like totally did. She made the assumption, but we're at a doctor's office and time is at the kind of essence there. So I took that moment to assure her of things and also correct her, but not dive deep. So I didn't say, actually, you're racial profiling me, and I didn't accuse. I want to make sure not to accuse. I wanted to make sure to tell her, okay, this is actually my reality. So that maybe the next time she won't make those assumptions, she can ask questions. And so for those situations, I just have to be really prayerful and think, okay, what, because I'm an ambassador of Jesus, I just have a different call. And so I've got to think, what am I going to leave her with? Because this relationship is ending right now. Or what if I do see her again? Will I have that chance to share the gospel or truth or what? So I pick and choose because I want to proclaim the good news ultimately. And if I lash out, I do believe that there's a place for strong rebuke, but I just think if I lash out in any way, it could hinder that potential for the future. I also do think that this conversation can be done in such a way that is grace-filled and full of life and actually full of goodness and understanding. And so if I can provide a place where that can be that way, I'm not talking about, and I bowing to some supremacy kind of making people feel comfortable. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking like biblically speaking, I just have a different call. And so I'm going to think that way in regarding my picking and choosing. And I also, is it a proverb? Answer a fool in something or another. I can't remember. Yeah, that's another pick and choose because I don't want to waste time on something that is only the Lord. I mean, only the Lord can do any of this, but I also I'm cautious. Like, this person, especially if you can see it on Twitter, for example, if you look on someone's profile and that's all they do is argue, I'm not going to engage. No thanks, because I know what you're doing, and I, in good faith, I just think this isn't going to go well. So does that make sense? So that's how I pick and choose.
It makes a lot of sense. I'm sorry to interrupt. That was gold right there, but it just stood out to me. So I interrupted you so thank you for that. And that's one of the things you do that I just admire is how clear that was, how gospel infused your thinking on that was in your response. But I'm happy to get back to law school on your story too.
Well, I got in to law school and I did well on the LSAT and I have a good GPA, blah, blah, blah. But when I was in a class, it was assumed that all people of color get in because of affirmative action. And so that's another assumption is that we don't we can't earn anything, or we are lazy, or again, I'm not talking, this isn't necessarily women specific, but that is an assumption. And so that I in tears actually went all in on that, because we were in a class where that was appropriate. So another assumption is, I don't know if it's, I don't know if, I know that I've heard that, yeah, okay, I'll say it this way. There is an ideal beauty that a lot of people of color would not fit into. It's very European, and even a real specific European look. I mean, it's white. And so a lot of people of color have just now, for example, felt more comfortable wearing their hair natural. And natural would mean in the way our hair grows on our head, which is typically tighter curls, or some can have froze. It just depends on your culture, on your background. But that is something that I do see. I would not say that people don't think we're beautiful. So I don't think that people would say that women of color aren't beautiful, but I do think the ideal beauty is a slender, all around slender shape with a certain hair that would be European or white. And so if that is the standard of beauty, that means a whole lot of Black people have to assimilate. So you've got all these products and all these things, and in order to fit a certain to be in business meetings or to be on TV, which you see, and when I say TV, I'm talking about like news, not talking about television in general, but television in general was like that. It's changing, but so is news. If you look on national news channels, you see Black women with curly hair now or braids, where before in the 80s and 90s, you would never have seen that ever. And so I am seeing that this ideal beauty is kind of going out the window but it is something that has been fought for, like, and so I don't know if that's a hardship, but it is a hardship if your body shape is not stick figure, like you're, I don't know how else to say it, but anyways, and so I'm just trying to be appropriate since.
I think hardship's the right, like, I mean, I'm the father of two daughters, and the idea of a person not fitting the impossible. So there is an ideal standard of beauty, and it's also unachievable by most people by natural means and actually eating. And so the pain that causes to be convinced that you're not beautiful is evil.
Oh, it makes me cry thinking about it. But there was this young girl who, she had to have been maybe 3 or 4, and she had dark skin and kinky, beautiful hair. And she kept saying how she was talking to her mom, and they videoed this, and she was saying that she was ugly, and her mom was saying, "You are not ugly, you're beautiful." And she was just reassuring her that that's how God has made her. She's beautiful. But there is, when you only see really light-skinned people with bone straight hair, and you look the absolute opposite, then you're gonna wonder, am I acceptable? And so yeah, it is a hardship, a problem, but I do think that there is a real encouraging, pushback's not the right word, reemergence, that's not the right word, I don't know. There's just this beautiful, we're seeing different images being displayed, and celebrated. And I think that's a good thing, because we're all created in the image of God to reflect him. And he made us, and he made us so different. And so I'm grateful for that. But when I was growing up, that would have been a hard thing. Jim?
No, yeah. So you've done a great job of, even through your own experience, talking about assumptions and painful experiences. And if I'm imagining a Venn diagram, there's a lot overlapping here with, let's say, false stereotypes. And so it's a separate thing, but there's a lot overlapping. How would you speak into false stereotypes in our culture when it comes to Black women's experience?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think my brain thought that was the question. And so I was kind of going into some of those stereotypes, because if I were talking about hardships, I probably would have talked about a few other things. So I'm interested in why it's called false stereotypes, because I would say that any stereotype would be.
That's fair. Yeah. That's a really good point.
Yeah. I mean, I guess
it's kind of an oxymoron of a phrase.
Yeah. It's like a double negative or something. But yeah, so it could be, sometimes there can be truth, I guess, is what some people would say. But when you come to stereotypes, I think one that wears me out, especially as someone who's typically not given to a lot of anger, is the assumption that anytime we speak with any authority or any strength, we are angry Black women. That actually makes me angry because I'm like, no, we're just speaking direct and clear, and we're not angry. And so there is anger at times, and there's a place for anger, but I'm not sure where that stereotype came from. And if you even think about Michelle Obama, who, it doesn't matter where you land, but the images that were in a lot of the conservative media usually show her like with her face disfigured. Like her face is like, they find her in some comment where looks like she's angry. And that is it's a strange assumption. I should know where it originated, where the stereotype originated, but I don't at this time. But that is something that is a stereotype that I don't. It's a troubling stereotype. I think another stereotype could be, but I don't know. I don't know that I've experienced it, and I'm trying to think of a time where I would have. Is a false idea that we can't be weak or that we have to be strong. And now here's what's interesting. I don't know if that is actually something that we place on ourselves or if it's something that the culture places on us. That would be a different conversation, but I would say it could be a little both. Like we feel like we have to be strong because of what the cultural pressures and other things that we've just experienced. So we don't want to show weakness. And that to me, I think would be probably more of the issue than people putting pressure on us to be strong. And so again, that would be a conversation I would need to think through a little bit more. But then that socioeconomic hardship thing that I was talking about, that was actually a stereotype.
Yeah, I see.
Yeah. So I think that's a major one. Another one is, okay, so it drives me bonkers, but people will come up to me all of the time speaking in a certain dialect and with like trying to I don't know what they're doing. But so they'll be like, I can't do it, but it's like, yo, yes, sister. And so they make the assumption that I speak a certain way or that I interact a certain way. I have a friend who was at dinner and someone walked up to him and just said, Black Lives Matter. And so there's these weird assumptions that we all speak alike and sound like. They have taken entertainment and applied it to every single African-American person, Black person, not even African-American, every Black person walking. And it is so bizarre. So the assumption would be that we're culturally, culturally, we're all the same. Now I think there's a culture, and I would definitely, when I'm with my sisters, there's a loosening and a certain way that I'm going to speak to my sisters and family, but it's so inappropriate. And it is so bizarre. And so that is a strange assumption that people make. And so there is really it boils down to, and I want to say this in two assumptions that's being made. One, the assumption is the person who does have a certain cultural and dialect isn't intelligent, which is a false assumption. The other one is that all people of color are not intelligent and have a certain manner of which they speak and act, and so yeah, I just think those are a few. There's a lot more, but
the word that I hear that is like nails on a chalkboard is articulate. Because I don't, assuming the best, they're trying to give a compliment, but it basically sounds like your assumption is that Black people are not smart and can't talk the way you want them to talk. And when you say, oh, they're articulate, it's like no one ever says about me or my wife or my children that we're articulate, as if most people that might look like us are not. I hear that one so frequently. And so part of this is because the people who are listening, we're trying to help them think through things they do and say, like, I don't see color and all lives matter. Like what does that sound like to other people, brothers and sisters in Christ, or other images of God? How does that sound like? And so maybe it'd be a good idea for people who use the word articulate with regard to other people and race to be aware of what that sounds like they're saying. We're not saying you're saying you think they're all dumb. It just sounds like you're saying you think they're all dumb.
Yes, especially if you're only saying those words to a certain people group. So if you're only saying, and I speak a certain way. I grew up in the South. I grew up in predominantly white culture. So some people have said, oh, you sound white. And that freaks, I don't like that either. But I am always told that I am articulate. I hear that all of the time. And yeah, it does say a certain, it is communicating exactly what you are saying, Justin. And so if you don't say that, one, why do you even need to point out that? That's really interesting. So I would ask, what's motivating that? Why do they need the reassurance of being able to articulate sentence or words in a sentence? I don't know. So ask yourself why you feel the need to encourage that specific area, and then just don't say it. There's so many ways that we can encourage one another.
It's funny you said that. It was Mike Aitchison was co-hosting, and it was Jerome Gay that we had on the show, and they were going back and forth on this, and Mike Aitchison said, "So I just so appreciate the way you articulated that so articulately." But another phrase, another way of saying this is, you speak so well, or they speak so well, and saying this only to one group of people, and nobody says that to me.
Exactly. Yeah. So you can just encourage them. Thank you for what you shared, and be real specific about what they shared, not how they shared it. That's the problem. Get to the substance, not about the how. And so, because that is why it's inappropriate or a stereotype if you're talking about how they shared it. If they're like a 12-year-old, then say that they are articulate. When my son talks, who's 14, he has a little history YouTube channel. I'm like, dude, you're articulate. You're 14. You should be climbing trees. And so I can say those things to, I think, a child. But when you're talking to an adult, I think you don't need to talk about how they speak. You can talk about the substance of what they said.
Amen. This is very helpful. Thank you. And I like hitting the bullseye on these things instead of just kind of walking around them. We need clarity in these conversations. So I want to drill down, if we can. Have you observed, we just talked about various stereotypes or assumptions that you have found in the world. Have you found these challenges and stereotypes mirrored in the church? The classical Christian, we like the Bible, we believe Jesus died and rose again. Like, have you seen these things we just talked about mirrored in the church?
Every single thing I've experienced in the world, I've experienced in the church. And that is the unfortunate reality. I've experienced from church friends, I absolutely. I think it's because the people in the world are the people in the church as well. I mean, people are learning, I think they're learning where you're investing your time and energy learning about other people will affect the church. And so if you're really invested in whatever it is, it's just, so it doesn't surprise me that I would we all need some sort of educating, right? So it doesn't surprise me that some of these things I would experience in the church. As a matter of fact, my first book, United, I document a lot of it. Just some of the things said to me, like asking me if I burn. I get that question a lot. Like, do you burn in the sun? Anyways. And so can I touch your hair? It's a strange reality that a lot of, it others us. It makes people of color just feel like we're other than, which is kind of something different. And so I do think there's a way to ask questions that's appropriate, but most of the things that people are asking are makes us feel subhuman. And so that to me is a problem in the church as well. I do think that these conversations, and especially right now, just given all that has happened, are helping that in tremendous ways. But so I haven't experienced it probably in the last several years in a church. I think there's some awareness that's happened, or that is happening, but it has been my experience, yes.
And that's what sounds like it would be particularly challenging, sad. I don't know other words, but those are the first ones that come to mind. That, that's Romans 12. Don't be conformed to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Our hope is that we are transformed less. I know on other issues, I might even have blind spots on this issue, but I might be a consumer. I know we're all conformed to the patterns of this world, but we have resources in Scripture and in the tradition that are perpetually undermining those conforming to the patterns of the world, and that's what just stings. Is our family is looking more like we're a national identity or some other cultural identity first, as opposed to members of the kingdom of God that has inside of it resources that undermine the patterns of the world, the patterns of evil. And that's why I thought they probably were your experience, but I didn't know. But I was hoping like, no, it's encouraging that it hasn't been that much in the most recent few years, but that's almost like a consolation in a sense that, what the Christian faith gives us is a radical vision that undermines that. The image of God stuff you talked about earlier, the Imago Dei, and the way Jesus dealt with people is a good starting point for thinking about this. And it seems like so many people in the family, the Christian family, are at best blind to this and at worst complicit in the work of Satan.
Mm. Yeah. What has helped probably in the last several years is that the leadership of the church has led in this area. So if I just want to say, if anyone's a leader, you can shepherd your people, and they're listening to you. And so that, I think, has helped. And that's probably why I haven't experienced the same. I've experienced all sorts of stuff. And I've been a lot of, there's been a sort of loneliness, because one of the things, if I can take us away from stereotypes for a minute, and just because one of the things I think a lot of Black women experience is this loneliness, insofar as if you're in a predominantly white church, white space, white whatever, you're likely one of the only, and potentially there's just a few. And so what I have experienced in the last couple of years is trying to share my concerns with fellow people who don't get it. And you don't have to get it, but I've had a few push against it. And that has been hard, because what's going on in the national news, or the national, or our country in general, has been so divided and so just, I don't know if it's lent. It's helped us. I know it hasn't. It's actually been terribly damaging to conversations progressing, for some, not all. For some, the Lord is just doing such a mighty work, and I'm so grateful. But in others, it's made it that much harder to actually express sorrow or even any kind of lament, because they don't get it. And they're like, so what? The laws have changed, And so there isn't this understanding that there's a lot yet to do. And so that is more of what I've probably experienced than stereotypes.
Well, Trillia, I just really appreciate you sharing all this. How if I can, we've talked a lot about gospel listening over the course of this season, and I would just like to listen for a moment about, if you don't mind, how this affects you, as a person, as a woman, as a human being, as a mom. How do you internalize and process these emotions? Because this is not an experience that I've had, and the more I hear about it, it just breaks my heart. And I would just like to hear how you process that as a Christian, as a mom, as a human.
Yeah. So as a Christian, the moment I became a Christian, the Lord gave me a new identity. And so I understand fully who I am and whose I am. Like, I'm his. And so no one, even they can harm me, but they can't take away my ultimate dignity and worth, because it comes from God himself, the creator of the universe, who created me and who created all these women who we are referring to. And so I feel very rooted in that. So it's helped me survive and thrive, because I'm not getting my worth from what you think of me. And so that's helped. That doesn't mean I don't ever struggle with that. Of course, fear of man creeps in and you're afraid, but in my general worth, God is really, that's one of the first things he did was reveal to me through his word, the Genesis 1:26 truth, 27, that I'm created in the image of God, that the Psalm, is it 143 or something like that? I'm knit together in my mother's womb, that every tribe, tongue, and nation, that Jesus died for anyone who would believe, and he doesn't discriminate in regards to race and ethnicity and culture. And God, he's radical. I mean, think of him and the Samaritan woman and all of the lines he crossed. That's where my hope is. So I know that wouldn't be for everyone. And so I do hope, if someone's listening, that they would be encouraged to hope in God, to put their faith in Jesus, to find out what it means to be made new, a new identity in him, and how in this new identity, he doesn't strip our culture. He doesn't strip our ethnicity. He keeps it. And it says in eternity, we're going to be rejoicing together, every tribe, tongue, and nation. So it's beautiful. And so I have found those truths to keep me. I have also been in an interview somewhere and then gone to my hotel room and wept. I wept, but I didn't weep for me. I wept for them, because ignorance divides so much and it does so much harm. And when people continually say things that are harmful, I've been able to absorb those things and to share truth, but not everyone can. And I recognize how painful and wrong that is. And so I lament it deeply. And so what it hasn't done anything regarding my identity, but there is a sorrowful yet always rejoicing in my soul, because there's much to be sorrowful for. And I carry those burdens, casting them to the Lord, but I carry them. And so I have done so much crying and lamenting and crying out for the Lord to renew minds and to reveal truth, to help with all this confusion that's out there regarding people. And I also am very aware that we have an enemy. Of course, we're divided relationally. We shouldn't be surprised by this. The scriptures tell us that how will people know that we're his disciples? Jesus says, by our love for one another. So of course it's broken. And knowing that we don't wrestle with just flesh and blood, but with the principalities and all the evil that's out there, that really helps me in this battle, because it's not just, it goes beyond just, is that person against me, or do they not like me because of that? No, there's a battle for souls, because the enemy wants to destroy us. And I believe that really strongly and deeply. And so when I keep that in my mind, then I'm gonna fight the right battle here. And so that's how I handle it. But and I do think practically getting some good friends. I got some good friends, and some I unfortunately have been broken because of these issues, because they just don't want to hear it, or they don't. And I say, okay, Lord, I lay that down. But I've got some really good friends who I can go to, who I can cry with, who's going to cry with me, who I can share these things. And I am grateful for the leadership of my local church. I am a local church girl. I'm an advocate for the local church. I think we need to be in local churches. I believe ministry is made in the local church. And so I do think finding that local church that preaches the truth and that understands this beautiful, diverse message of the gospel is important. So just practically speaking, good friends and a local church, and of course my husband, who is also my good friend, help.
What I love, you're just gospel infused, and so there was the vision of everything you were saying there. That was a proclamation of good news, and as we know from Tim Keller, we are talking about good news. We're not primarily about good advice, but I love what you did is the foundation of good news, and from that can grow some good advice. And you talked about church and friends. We could have ended it there, but I do have one question. I'm thinking about people listening, and the one question in the kind of wisdom, advice, suggestion category is, what about parenting in this situation? So, because I mean, you hit all the practical questions I had. Like, what about church? What do you do personally? And this is from Trillia. This is not, again, you're not speaking for everyone, but like thinking through how does what's happening now affect the way you parent? And I don't know exactly how. I think you said your son's 14, and I think your daughter's a few years younger, probably. I'm going to say 10 or 11, maybe. But There we go. So how does this affect parenting? Just one last piece of just as people are thinking through this, because your wisdom is feels like gold dropping from heaven.
Oh, well, you're kind. I'm going to do something that I've never done, and I hope y'all can say no. I'm going to invite myself back to your podcast, because that could be an entire episode. I have a lot to say about parenting.
We accept.
This has been so good. I accept.
But
Thank you.
Yeah, that really is a bigger conversation, so I will start by just saying this one practical piece of advice. Your kids are either going to be taught by you or the culture. What's your choice? Who's going to be teaching your children? Because they're going to learn. The other thing is whatever, if you don't know, and if you're not equipping your own heart, if you're not confessing sin and repenting, if you're not evaluating the way you look at people and what you're saying, you're not going to be able to actually teach your kids these things. So it really starts with us. It starts with us evaluating our speech, evaluating our hearts, repenting where needed, and doing these things in front of our children. But then I think making sure that we present this conversation clearly and broadly. So we're going to be, you're going to teach age appropriate the hard things, right? So your kids are going to learn it. So let them learn from you. Teach the hard things, but also teach them to celebrate differences so that they don't think everything is wrong or bad I think that's part of the problem with our culture and why we're having such a hard time. Understandably so, given the history of the United States, we've got to have the hard conversations because of our history and where we continue to be now. History is not that long ago. Just in, I think it was 1970, was the Loving case that allowed my husband and I to be married legally. That's not that long ago. I remember my son was looking over my shoulder as I was researching these things, and he was like, "Whoa, Mom, what?" And I was like, "Yep, history is not that long ago." And even culturally, I don't know when this episode will come out, but we're living in a historical moment right now. So I think we need to be educating our kids about these things, but in regards to the gospel and the Bible, we need to be teaching them all of it. If you've read Ephesians 1-10, read the rest of the chapter and teach it to them. If you've never done it, which it's rarely preached, do it. Learn these things. Learn what the scriptures actually say. Do we know what Numbers 12 or 13 says? I'm not going to tell you. Go look it up. And research, read, educate, because if you don't do it yourself, you're not going to be able to do that with your kids. But I do think that's a longer conversation. And I've had the joy of writing and thinking about these things and experiencing it because I'm raising biracial children, which I never mentioned, but my husband's white. So these are things that we've been talking about since the beginning.
Well, I so appreciate our time. I'm excited for our next episode. We can figure that out later. But and I imagine we'll talk a lot about your new book. But just in case this is the only episode that somebody listens to, I want to make sure we talk about your new book, Creative God, Colorful Us. Can you give us a little quick description of it? Because we're talking parenting.
Yeah. So Creative God, Colorful Us is really about the gospel and the image of God. It's looking at really Genesis to Revelation and trying to teach kids what is the gospel, how do we relate to one another, where can we go wrong, and Jesus rescued us, and one day he will finish all of this. And so it's kind of, it looks at that gospel infused conversation about ethnicity and differences in general, and how to apply it to with their friends in their local church, and what does it mean? So it's a book about God's delightfully different family, but for ages 6 to 12-ish.
Well, I have 4 kids in that range, so I am going to get it, and I am looking forward to walking through that with my family. Thank you so much for all that you're doing for this time. We are thankful for you and your ministry, and certainly pray every blessing on you and your family.
Thank you.
For more interviews, resources, and discussion questions based on the content you've heard, go to asinheaven.com. That's ASINHVN.com. If you liked this episode, please take a second to give us a 5-star rating on iTunes, which you can do right from the Apple Podcasts app if you're listening there, or take a second to share it with a friend. Thanks again for listening.